Okay, let's talk in slide 13 about the lecture schedule for just one moment. So as I said at the top of the show, this is actually the last formal class that I will be doing. Next week, on the left-hand side there, you've got Adam. He'll be looking at media funding models. And then week 8, he'll be looking at the mobile phone as a disruptor. And then we've got Professor Bloy, week 9, coming to enlighten us about media law and social media. So some of the questions you've asked here, folks, save them up for the great man. Not sure what we're doing in the workshop yet, but we'll do something which will be very useful, I'm sure. And then week 10, on the Tuesday, March the 23rd, we will have tutorials for the assessment. Now, remember, this is really important, and it was brought home to me yesterday because of the experiences I had with a student in another class. With the assessments, I know that when you're an undergrad, and you're all first-year undergrads, so you're probably, I don't know you that well, because we've not met, and I've not seen any of your work yet. But when you're an undergrad, and I must admit, when I was an undergrad, what I usually did is that I waited until the very last minute before I started work on my assessment. And then I submitted it. And then guess what happens next? Mostly, I wasn't a very good undergrad student. I hate to tell you that, but I wasn't. And I would get very modest marks. I'd get marks in the 50s, or sometimes even in the 40s. Isn't that a shameful confession? I was much better when I did my PhD, I must say. So if you take that approach, you're setting yourself up for trouble. So I would encourage everybody in this class, I encourage all of my students to start thinking about your assessments now. I mean, not literally now, but certainly by the end of this class, you should really start moving on your assessments. Particularly assessment 1, because it's only a month away. It's a month away to the day. It's the 26th of March. So we will have last-minute tutorials on Tuesday, March the 23rd for an hour. Okay, and if you want to speak to me before then, you can, and we can maybe have a tutorial online. But that is the stake in the ground. That's your last chance for tutorials. The actual assessments, the presentation, as you'll find out in a moment, is on that Friday, which is Friday the 26th of March. So make sure that you do some preparation. You start your preparation early. The reason I'm really emphasizing this is that yesterday, in another group that I teach, this is second-year journalism students, they have a deadline today at 2 o'clock. In 13 minutes, their deadline ends today. And I said to my class, okay, I'm available yesterday, Thursday, online for online discussions, last minute chats about your assessments. And one student came to me and she confessed that she'd only started thinking about it on that morning. And sorry, the day before. She did a load of work and she showed it to me and she got it completely wrong. She got it completely wrong. And she said, what am I going to do? I said, well, I can't do anything about the deadline. You've got to hit the deadline. So she's going to hit the deadline. She's probably worked 24 hours to try and sort it out. But she came to, the point is, folks, she left it until the last minute. She was sure that she was doing the right thing, and then she showed it to me. She found out it was a completely wrong thing, and she's going to get a very low mark for that. It's not my fault. I mean, she did actually confess to it. She realised the error of her ways. But please, folks, please don't do that, because that's the normal way I find that undergrads work, and I used to be like that. So I kind of understand it, but it's bad. It's a bad habit. The sooner you start moving on them, the better your mark will be, the more you'll enjoy it, and the more fulfilling it will be in every respect. So we're going to talk today about assessments 1 and 2. So the golden rule, just to triple reiterate, start moving on it now, and particularly, ironically, assessment 2, which is not until April, is it? You know, it's a long way down the track. It's after Easter, but I really recommend you start thinking about it now. Slide 14. If you need assessment guidance, and again, I come back to my experience with some students yesterday, there are 2 PDFs on Moodle. You can check them out now. Go and have a quick look. And make sure that you download them and read them. So you've got 2 separate assessments. It's all there in very, very clear bullet points, what you have to do, when you have to do it by, how you submit it, and what you're going to get marked on. And again, yesterday I had 2 conversations with 2 different students who had clearly not read the brief for the assessments at all. They hadn't even opened the documents, because what they submitted was light years away from what I was asking for. And clearly, they've only got 24 hours to sort it out again. So they left it until the last minute, and they haven't read the brief. So essentially, they've done everything that you need to do if you want to fail. You know, I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. So please don't fall into that trap, folks. I'm sure you're more switched on than my other group. I don't know. Maybe you're. I don't know. I hope so. So make sure you read the assessment guidance. It's all there in black and white on Moodle. So let's talk slide 15. I'm just going to have a drink of water. Let's talk about assessment 2. We'll do assessment 2 first. Okay, then we'll talk about assessment 1. And then I can have a break from talking and you can do some work. Hang on a second. So assessment 2, I'll tell you what, let's everybody open up the assessment guidelines. So go to Moodle, assessments, assessment 2, brief and criteria. Click on that. Click on it and download it, and then I'll be satisfied that you actually have the information. So there it all is. It's not a huge brief, but it's detailed and it's everything that you need to know. And don't forget, you know, you are, and I had to say this yesterday, don't forget, and it sounds crazy, but you are university students. This isn't school anymore. So the whole point of university, it's a bit like going from the European Games to the Olympic Games. You're now competing in the Olympic Games, folks. So standards are higher, and we also, as teachers, we expect you to do more thinking and more analysis and more work. We do, at this level of education, we don't hold your hands. We don't do it for you. And at school, that's one of my criticisms at school. I think sometimes they do too much of that, especially when it comes to passing exams. You know, I want to know how fantastic your mind operates and how good you are at expressing yourself and how you organise material and how you do your research. I'm not going to do that for you. You have to actually do it and show that you can do it. So hence you will see from the brief that it's quite open-ended in some places. I don't tell you how to do certain things. Although saying that, I'm going to give you some guidance for the rest of today's session. So have a look at the assessment brief. Slide 16, just to clarify the details of what you need to do. It's half the mark, it's 50% of the mark for the whole module. It's a 1,500 word essay and the deadline is April 21st, which is about, what, 8 weeks away. Like I said, please don't delay it until week 7. You know, don't do it start the week before, because there is a correlation between what marks students get and when they actually start working on it. The sooner you start working on it, the clearer you're going to have it in your mind. And if you make any mistakes, then it's much easier to rectify them if you make your mistakes early rather than the day before submission. So, using secondary sources, students are required to submit a 1,500 word essay that compares and contrasts. You might want to underline that or highlight it. The recent history and future prospects. Again, highlight those phrases, recent history, future prospects, in a different colour, of 2 of the following media companies. Students should choose 1 from each column. So on the left hand side you got what me and Adam are calling legacy. So these are organisations that have been around a long time. And they're still media organisations, they're still pretty successful, but they've had to cope, remember class number 1, with this thing called the digital revolution. So they've had to change and modify their activities and do different things and so on. The organisations on the right, they are what we're calling new media organisations. So these have actually started in the period of the digital revolution. Facebook, I think it was 2005. I think Instagram 2007. I forget the dates. You can check them out. YouTube was 2007. TikTok, the app you mentioned, was more recent, and Twitter. So you got 2 different sorts of media organisations, and what we want to know is how have they, about the recent history of these companies. So you choose 1 legacy and 1 new, and you talk about how each of those companies have developed in recent history, and also look at their future prospects. So you're going to speculate, you're going to look to the future and anticipate and suggest what the future might hold for a company. And just by looking at them now, I'm sure you can imagine that it's a different story. So the story for ITV is different to the story to Facebook. Very different. ITV, established 1953, 4, somewhere around there. It's been around nearly 70 years. Facebook is less than 20 years old. Totally different companies, different. ITV is British, Facebook is American. They're very different markets, they're very different in terms of what they do, but essentially they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to earn a profit from their media activities, aren't they? One is social media and the other is more traditionally broadcast media. So think about it. So right now, even though you haven't started investigating, if you were just to sort of think, if we were to have again, it's not very good online, but if we had a class discussion now from what you know about these companies, just throw it out there. So you know something about Disney even without any research. You know about their movies, right? You know about, there's a new channel, isn't there, Disney Plus, on cable, on satellite, whatever. Viacom you may not have heard of. You may have heard of CBS. That's a long-standing American news organizer, a TV channel. Daily Mail you probably know about. BBC, of course, you know all about. You know, so you do actually know quite a lot without doing any research. Okay, so that's what you need to do. That's what you need to do. It's a very, very straightforward brief, very simple. There's no great mystery to it. Let's talk about the criteria. Slide number 17. This is the criteria I'm going to mark you on. It's all detailed in the guideline document. So it talks about structure, content, accuracy, research and style. You'll notice that I've ticked accuracy. If you have any doubts about what accuracy means, go back to week 1 workshop. And if you write it down, because it's really important. Week 1 workshop. Watch, go to the PowerPoint, listen to the audio file, and I tell you what accuracy is all about. Professional presentation, grammatical, spelling and notational errors, is it correctly punctuated, etc. So it's got to be a high standard of accuracy. So we've done 1 of the 5 criteria already. We did it in week 1. You'll notice actually when we go to assessment 1 also has a criterion called originality. We've not got it here because Adam and I are essentially telling you what article to write. With assessment 1 you have much more flexibility in terms of coming up with your own ideas. So this one is really, the brief is quite strict for assessment 2, and we've got quite a well-defined idea of what we want you to do. So you don't have an originality measurement in the criteria. So what I'm going to do now, folks, for the rest of the first part of the show is to go through how to do it. Basically, I'm going to go through the criteria in detail, and this is me holding your hand, right? So if you were master's degree students, you wouldn't get this. You'd have to figure it out for yourself. Okay, but because you're undergrads, first year undergrads, then we need to give you a bit more help, right? But you do need to follow it, and if you don't follow it, you're probably going to get a low mark. Not because we're going to punish you, but because this method of writing essays works. It works really, really well. You can do it your own way, but it's a high risk because it might all collapse like a house of cards. So first point, I would say start with structure. Now, a lot of young students, what they do when they get an essay, the first thing they do is go to Google and they type, media organization or history and future of TikTok. Now, the problem with that, as we'll find out in a minute, is you'll get an enormous amount of responses, an enormous number of hits when you just go to Google. So what I suggest you do, and it's a wonderful thing that we've all been blessed with, and we don't use it enough these days, but you've all got this fantastic brain between your ears. So I want you to stop and think about it. Before you do anything, think about the structure of your essay. Now, there's a great metaphor here. It's a bit like if you're going to build a new home. I don't know if you've ever seen Grand Designs or any of those programs on TV. The first thing they do is the people, the family who want the new home, they get together with an architect, and the architect draws a sketch. So the family might say, right, we want a 3-bedroom bungalow, and we've got this much land, and we want 2 bathrooms and all that. Well, we've got plenty of money, that's for sure. If they can afford to buy something like that, build something like that. So what the architect then will do is a sketch. He or she on a piece of paper literally will just do a sketch. And then the next stage after that is a more formal drawing showing the dimensions and the quantities of materials that are needed. So essentially, before you even start, you need to be an architect and you need to do a sketch of what you're going to do. So what the criteria says, does the essay have a coherent structure? So it's got to stand up. And the building metaphor is really good for this. It has to stand up. So you have to have vertical walls and horizontal floors. It's got to look and feel and have the constitution of a coherent article, So if it's just a random collection of facts, that's not good structure, and if it's one big quote, that's not good structure. So what it needs is an attention-grabbing introduction. All good essays have an attention-grabbing introduction. And please don't start it off by saying, this is A-level standard, you'd say, for this essay, what I will do is compare and don't do that. That's not university degree standard writing. That is A-level standard writing. So please don't do that. So we need a proper introduction followed by a compelling main section and a suitable ending. Does the author use transitions to effectively link ideas and points together? I'll talk about that in a moment. So slide number 19. This really is me holding your hand, metaphorically. So what the essay says is 1,500 words, slide 19, 1,500 words that compares and contrasts. This is how I suggest you work it out. You may have done something like this at school with essay plans, but break down how you're going to divide your 1,500 words. You've got 1,500 words, so generally we say 10% for the introduction, that's 150 words, 10% for the summary stroke conclusion, that's another 150, which leaves you with 1,200, and I would suggest you divide it into 3 sections of 4. So think about these as paragraphs. You will actually need more paragraphs, but think about them as paragraphs. So background and recent history, company A. So let's say you choose ITV. So we need 400 words on ITV's background and recent history. Don't have too much on background. We don't want everything that's happened to it since 1953. Tell us something about the distant history, but focus more on the recent stuff. So you do that for company A, 400 words, and then you do it for company B, Facebook, TikTok, or whoever, and then you do it in the next paragraph, or the next section, 400 words for future prospects. And in this section, I suggest that you do B, and so you start with B here because it follows on nicely from the previous section. So if you're doing TikTok as company B, so you start your third section with TikTok. This is what the future suggests is going to happen to TikTok. However, then you talk about ITV. You say this is in stark contrast to ITV. And then you flip between B and A in the third section. And then right at the bottom, you'll notice bibliography references. You don't count them in the word count. So don't worry about those adding to your word count. So you've got 1,500 words to devote to your essay. And I mean, as I said, you can do it your own way, folks, if you want. I would strongly recommend, as an experienced academic, author, journalist and PhD holder, that you do it this way. And I'm not saying that because my opinion is better than yours. My opinion is just more informed, because I know that this works. Now, you can do it any way that you like. It's your choice. I recommend you do it this way. And the other thing to point out is you don't use subheadings. Don't use subheadings. You need to make it look like a professional piece of writing. Professional pieces of writing generally don't have subheadings. So don't say introduction and then write your introduction. Don't say summary conclusion and then write your summary conclusion. Okay, so just do it as a continuous piece of 1,500 words piece of writing. Slide 20. You'll notice at the top of the table in the blue section, I said title. Make it eye-catching and informative. Now, what normally happens is that students will use the essay question as a title. So if I don't point this out, some of you will say, using secondary sources, students are required, and then you'll use that as your title. That's not a title. That's not a title. What you need to do is have a look at some examples. And the place that I'm recommending as a role model, really, for this piece of work is this website called The Conversation. So the Conversation is a fantastic website. It's basically academics writing journalism. So it's people like me writing stuff about their specialist subject for general consumption, not for an academic audience, but for general consumption. And that's what I want you to use as a style guideline. So have a look at how journalists on The Conversation write titles. So there's a title that is relevant to possibly to your assessments. Public trust in the media is at a new low. A radical rethink of journalism is needed. So you need something like that about TikTok and Facebook or whatever it is you're doing, So make it eye-catching and informative. And they're actually quite difficult to do, titles. But don't use the question essentially as a title, using secondary sources. We need something eye-catching. Try and get readers to, engage and read it. So that's article structure, number 1. Within the article itself, slide 21, there's also structure within your essay. So what we've just done is the general structure. Think about it as the rooms of the house, the previous structure. So in the next part of structure is to look at how ideas are actually linked together. So I call them linking phrases. And if you get the linking phrases correct, then you have what's called smooth transitions between ideas, data, context, and so on. And what I've written on the left, using linking phrases to blend quotes, data, and facts with context and analysis. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. So if that's a bit confusing, what is painful to read in an essay is when a student simply jumps from point to point with no narrative in between them. You know, so it's almost like reading a bullet points on a PowerPoint. You know, Facebook founded in 2007. Its boss is called Mark Zuckerberg. It has this many, and that's just fact, and it's boring. And it's not easy to read. So what you need to do is use linking phrases to link ideas together. Some examples on the right. And I always say keep it simple. So if you say something like, you know, Facebook was the first social media organization to hit 100 million users. And then your next sentence could be, this is an important factor because. So those 6 words actually link your statement about 100 million users to the next thing. So they're linking things together. Another way of doing it is to say, a report from Oxford University supports this argument. So the sentence before that, if you're writing about COVID, could be something like, you know, 98% of people wear masks to protect themselves against COVID. Full stop. A report from Oxford University supports this argument. So then that ties your first statement into your second statement. And I'm sure you all do it. If not, you need to learn how to do it. It's very important. Because it's a good way of tying together complex discussions, which this essay will be, believe it or not. And the other good thing about linking phrases, and sometimes it's only a word, it helps you to change perspective. So you could write something like, this might appear to be a popular idea, but others disagree. And then you can say what the other people say. So it's a good way of saying, well, there's on this hand and on the other hand. You know, the other example, Mr. Smith, however, is not convinced. He said. So you've probably noticed this when you're doing reading, and hopefully you do a lot of reading, because that's how you learn to write, believe it or not. You need to master the art of the linking phrase. So this gives you smooth transitions within your essay. So that's structure. That's structure. So that's one of the 5 criteria. We've already done accuracy in week 1. Research. Let's move on to 22. So research is the information. So where do you go to find the information to put in your essay? And the criteria says this is how we're going to assess you. Does the essay show evidence of active research? Active research. Active. It means actually getting out there and finding stuff. For example, acquiring and analysing data. Is the essay correctly referenced, and does it have an accurate bibliography? So active research, just to emphasise, if you just use information that me and Adam have spoken about in class, that is not active research, that's passive research. That's you just picking up what you've gathered in class. We want to see evidence that you've gone beyond what you've learnt in class and found your own information. Let me explain more about this over the next couple of slides. Slide 23. Research, and it's difficult for your, I always talk about generations, but it is a huge difference for your digital generation and mine and Adam's pre-digital generation. Now, me and Adam both started off, we've got different careers, but similar careers in some ways, and we're also like within 5 weeks of each other in terms of our birthdays. He's slightly older than me, incidentally. So back in the day, in the 1990s when I started, information for articles, I would typically ring people up and meet them face to face and interview them. But I also, for things like data and trends and market movements and all that, I would literally have a filing cabinet like the one on the left. Huge, you might not have ever seen one. You often see them at the council tip because people can't find uses for them. So a big steel filing cabinet with 3 drawers. And mine was full of, you know, literally cuttings, pages of newspapers and magazines. So I'd read newspapers and magazines, and if I found something interesting, I'd rip it out and stick it in a file, and then hopefully remember where it was when I was writing an article. So each of the folders, just like on your computer, each folder would have a title, you know. So one folder might say, I don't know, Microsoft, another folder might say Google or whatever it might be. And that's how we did it. The problem we had back in the day was not having easy access to information. So we had to do things like that. We didn't think there was anything wrong with it. That's just how journalism was back in the day. However, now, your generation, you've got the opposite problem. You have TMI. You've got too much information. And you've also got too many sources. And you also, it finds it very, very difficult, and I can understand this totally. How do you decide that one piece of information is more relevant and valid than another piece of information? So you can't decide what's important. And basically what you do, or what some students do, to make sure that they cover everything, you cram your article with content. So it becomes fact, 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 data, data, data. And the article can't breathe, and the reader essentially becomes confused and suffocated by it all. And I'm sure you can all identify with that. There is just too much information out there, and you can't make sense of it. And it's a real skill to make sense of lots of information, and that's kind of what a degree is all about, helping you to understand, have the critical skills where you can decide what's important and what's relevant and what's valid and what's not relevant, important or valid. And that essentially, that's what one of the things that we're going to mark you on with this essay and future pieces of work in other modules as well. So there's a big difference. My generation, Adam's generation on one side, and your generation, we've got different issues, different problems. So you'll be pleased to know there is salvation. There is a way around this. Slide 24. What you need to do with your research, I strongly recommend this, is you start small. So do not go to Google and just expect Google to answer the question for you, because you're not using your brain then. You're subcontracting your critical faculties to Google, and that's quite scary when you get a robot or artificial intelligence to do it for you. You need to think it through. Start small. And the metaphor I always use here is a shopping list. So what you should do is write a list of the information that you actually need before you go to Google, and we'll talk about content in a moment. And the reason I say this, and again, there's a great metaphor, and I'm sure you've all been to IKEA, right? I've been to IKEA far too many times. And what happens when I go to IKEA, I start off and I say, right, I just need some candles or something really simple. Some candles. You can buy a big, a bag of tea lights for like £1.50 or something. So I go along to IKEA, and you obviously have to pick up a bag or a trolley. And then they're very clever, IKEA designers, because they send you around the whole stall, don't they? You sort of go in this zigzag pattern, and you have to go through the kitchen section, and you have to go through the lounge section and all that. And eventually the candles are right on the other side of the stall. But in the meantime, you go past all this other stuff that you didn't know that you needed. And before you know it, you get to the candles and you've spent £100 already, because you're picking up, it's called impulsive buying. It's called impulsive buying. And the store designers are very clever. They know how to promote that sort of thing. So I want you to avoid that. So avoid impulsive buying when it comes to information. Draw up a shopping list. What information do you need? And then go out and find it. And use strong secondary sources. When I say secondary, so this is stuff that's been published already. Primary is when you go and find it out for yourself, interviewing people. We're not doing that. We're doing secondary. So this is strong sources that exist already. So strong sources, I'll talk about that in a moment as well. And you need to do an appropriate amount. So don't do enough for like a 10,000 word dissertation. It's only 1,500 words. So think about it in terms of like packing your bags on holiday. You've got 3 bags. And you can't have any more. Essentially, you've got 3 sections to this essay. So you need some stuff about ITV, you need some research about Facebook, and you need some research about both of them to look to the future. So you don't need that much. There's 400 words in each of those sections, so you can't do everything. And bibliography, I'll talk about that in a moment. 2 more things on the left. Just be careful with Google. Like I said, Google is amazing, and I sometimes wonder how we ever survive without it. But just don't do those sort of mindless searches on Google, because you'll drown in information. Wikipedia is fantastic for background information, so by all means read the Wikipedia pages of the organisations that you're investigating, but don't quote Wikipedia, and please don't plagiarise Wikipedia, because we will spot it. It's purely for background information. Slide 25. Okay, so sources of information, these are again, I'm holding your hand a lot here, folks. I'm giving you a huge amount of help. And this works. You can do it your own way, but this works. So important sources. I've said strong secondary sources. Corporate websites. So if you're doing ITV, go to the ITV website. If you're doing Facebook, go to the Facebook website. The Facebook corporate website. And there'll be a section, the corporate section, with all the financials in there and the strategies and all the documents and all that. Other places to go, as you know from what we did last week, Ofcom. the broadcast regulators. So if you're doing ITV or you're looking at broadcast organisations, Ofcom is really good for research. There are loads of other research organisations out there, media research organisations. You can find them. I'm not going to tell you where they are. You will partly get assessed on finding these organisations. Something I spoke about in week 1, a fantastic radio programme, podcast on BBC Radio 4 called The Media Show. And I'm going to suggest that you have a look at that later on for assessment 1 as well. And there's also this website, which I've already mentioned, called The Conversation. So this is academics writing about their specialist subject in a very accessible way. It's a great website. Again, the link is coming up later on. Have a look at that. See if you can find anything on there about your companies or the businesses that they're in, the industry that they're in. And that would be useful information. And also news websites, so BBC, CNN, other reputable journalism organisations, they cover the media industry too. So have a look on the BBC or CNN about articles about Facebook, about the number of subscribers they've got, about the financial problems, if they have them, that they've got. So other business journalists have written about your company. You can quote them as well. So there's some really good, useful information out there. There's 5 good sources of research. So that points you in the right direction. One thing really to avoid, social media chit-chat. So Freddie from London says Facebook is finished, lol. You know, that is terrible. That is not relevant research. Who the hell is Freddie? What does Freddie know about Facebook? That's just opinion. We're looking at strong, authoritative sources. So a couple more slides on research, and I'm sure you know how to do this. So all I mentioned before, folks, about references. So we're not going to have references. I could explain it, but I think the risk of getting it wrong is too high. So basically, just write the essay as it comes. But at the end, you need a bibliography, and I'm sure you know how to do this. I'm sure that one of your other teachers has showed you how to do this. If not, here's a quick crash course in it. So if you're referencing a book, it needs to be like at the top. It's all slightly different depending on what you're referencing. An academic journal article looks like that. A journalism article, in other words, in a newspaper or on a news website, BoM. And if it's a web page, you need to do it like that. Please, 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 everybody, please get this right. This is the easiest way to earn points, is to get your bibliography right. And every year, and literally every year of my career, I've gone through this in advance, and there is still at least 1 or 2 or 3 students who get it completely wrong, and then you lose marks. So please don't lose marks. It's an unnecessary way to lose marks. It must look like that. So it's generally author's name, initial, the year that they published it, and then the name of the piece of work, and then the publisher. Right? I mean, that is the standard bibliography format. So if you ever get confused, come back to this slide and also to slide 27. The other thing to remember is you need to do it alphabetical on the author's name. So Merrill, as you'll notice, comes before Monbiot because I'm ME and George Monbiot is MO. Okay? So it needs to be alphabetical on author's name. Now, if there is no author, a lot of BBC news websites articles don't have an author. So put it down as BBC. Put it down as BBC. Or if it's on a CNN website and there's no author, put CNN and the year in which it was published. Okay, and final point on this, essential point really, only include sources that you actually use in your essay. And I've seen it happen, is that you'll read a piece of student work. It has loads and loads and loads of references in the bibliography, and the students think, oh, look at all this, I've done some really good research. And then you read the essay and hardly any of it is quoted. So that's the whole point of a bibliography. You're telling the reader where you got your information from. So don't put books and articles and stuff in there that you don't actually use, you know. So we're not going to do referencing. So we're not going to do footnotes. We're not going to do Harvard referencing. I just want you to write it as a straight piece of work, but make sure that it's well informed. And we can tell by reading it if it's well informed. If you don't have quotes and stuff in there and data, then you're going to get a low mark for research. So don't think you're going to get a high mark for research just because you list a lot of references. I think that's my point. We need to see that research in your essay, and we can tell. If it's all just opinion, we can tell that you haven't done much research. Slide 28. Gosh, this is taking me longer than I thought. Okay, we'll carry on and have a break slightly towards the end. Okay, so slide 28, content, and what it says in the brief. Does the essay have the appropriate amount, quantity and combination of content? The content should be a suitable mix of quotes, paraphrasing, narrative and data. Key point, well, it's all key, isn't it? But the key point really is the bottom bit, the last bit. Quotes, paraphrasing, narrative and data. So this is the stuff that you actually put into your essay. And the metaphor I'm going to use here is the bricks. If this is a building, the content are the bricks and the timber in your building. It's what your article is actually made of. That's what I mean by content. Slide 29. And again, I'm holding your hand. I'm telling you exactly how to do it here, folks. But you've got to put the pictures, the bricks together, essentially. So essential content is history of the organisation. In brief, in just literally a couple of sentences. You know, that's all we need to know about the history of ITV or whatever it might be. Financial performance. Think about what we did in the crash course in business. We want to know about advertising revenue for ITV. We want to know about its profits. You know, are they higher now than they were 10 years ago, or are they lower? Trends. Please underline this or highlight it. Trends. If you just give me a piece of information like ITV had profit last year of £100 million, that means nothing. I need to know what it was the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that. So that will tell me if the profit trend is down or up. So trends are really, really important. Next point, we spoke about share price in the crash course for business. Again, the trend, think about the example I used of Google. So when it had its IPO, I think it was $85, and within 12 months it had gone up to 247. But what happened in the years after that? Has it been a consistent trend all the way down the track? Next point, again, how do we measure the success of an organisation? Readership, newspapers readership, as you know, has collapsed over the years, but they're getting more viewers online, more hits online. Daily Mail, classic example. The number of viewers for ITV. Again, terrestrial TV is kind of dying a death, but ITV has done quite well with satellite and cable, and shows like, you know, Love Island and so on have been very popular on ITV. So you can talk about that. Subscribers for Netflix or whoever it might be. Again, we want trends. It's no use just telling us what it is this year. We need to know what it was last year and the year before. You know, and if you're ambitious, put a chart in there. You know, show us the trend in a bar chart or a line chart. Next point, I've called them significant moments, good and bad. So, for example, all of those Simon Callow shows, what's it called? Britain's Got Talent. What was the original one called? Pop Stars, the X Factor, all that. If you look at the reports about ITV, those programs, and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and what's the other one? Love Island, and so on. They've basically reinvented ITV. They have changed the fortunes of ITV over the years. So you could talk about them in terms of significant moments, but tell us how many viewers it attracted, and tell us about the advertising, because it's all about advertising revenue, right? And finally, the company's place in the broader industry. What I mean by this is that Facebook in the context of social media. So as you know, Facebook, there was something on the radio the other day about Facebook which is quite interesting, and the commentator said Facebook, and it's something that I know and you know, Facebook is my generation. Your generation doesn't really do Facebook. So the problem with that is Facebook currently has a very large number of members, in myself included, but that membership is not growing because your generation, you're not going to Facebook. So it's almost like repeating the pattern of newspapers. So the newspapers, that most newspaper readers who actually read a paper, if you like my mum, they're all my mum's generation. I don't read them anymore. You know, so media is generational. So think about Facebook in the context of social media as a whole. So TikTok is growing massively. Facebook is actually shrinking, I think. You know, so talk about that as well. In the blue box, types of content. So think about the types of content. So you've got data, like numbers, you know, share price, profits, numbers of subscribers, viewers, and so on. You can also use quotes, so a quote from Mark Zuckerberg or a quote from an industry analyst or something like that. Paraphrasing, I'm sure you know this, but paraphrasing is like a quote, but what it does is it sums up something that somebody said in your own words rather than in their words. So, for example, Boris Johnson can make a huge long speech, and the journalist could paraphrase it as, you know, Mr. Johnson said that Britain is coping well with this phase of coronavirus. So the journalist is condensing maybe a couple of hundred words into one sentence. So you need paraphrasing in your article, in your essay as well. And you also need background and context. As I've said, tell us a little bit about the history of ITV, or a little bit about the history of Facebook, and tell us about the context. When ITV set up, it was only one of two channels, for goodness sakes, and now it's one of 1,000 channels. And the other type of content I'll talk about in one moment is narrative. So don't worry about that at the moment. We'll talk about it shortly. Some things to avoid: fact, as I said, is boring. Please don't do it. Try and break it up with linking phrases and different sorts of content. And long quotes, a whole paragraph lifted from a press release is really, really bad. Please don't do that, folks. Don't just lift a quote from a document and stick it in the article, because you're going to get a low mark for content, and you're going to get a low mark for structure and style as well, because it's just, well, you haven't written it for a start, and it might be completely out of context. And the way to do it, if you have any doubts, you've got plenty of time. Like I said, you've got nearly 2 months. The key point in the bottom left: find some examples of similar articles online. So find some examples of articles about Facebook, about ITV, about the future of the media industry. There's loads out there, and with some skill and judgment, you can find your own. Okay, let's move on to slide 30. So there are essentially two sorts of content. When you think about it, if you analyse articles and essays closely, as I've done over the years, you will notice there's basically two sorts of content. There's a content called research. So this is stuff that you found. This is data, quotes, facts that you've actually found. And like I said before, these are the bricks of your building. So think about your essay as being a building. The research are the bricks. The cement, however, is your narrative. So your narrative are the words that you, as a journalist or a writer, construct around the research to help the reader make sense of the research. So it's called narrative. So that's you holding the reader's hand. You're guiding them from the start of your article, your essay, all the way to the end. So there's two sorts of content. Slide 31. I hope this kind of makes sense, but imagine slide 31. Imagine here you've got 4 paragraphs. So this is your article. And I've used colours and this is purely an example. It doesn't have to look like this. It's purely a hypothetical example. So you might start top left with a fact number 1. Facebook is the most popular social media platform in the world. And then the next thing, the next piece of content is a piece of data. It could say something like, Facebook has 1.2 billion users. Context, right, this has changed colour, it's now narrative, so then you have to write a section to explain what that means. So you've got most popular in the world, and it's 100 million or 1.2 billion subscribers. So your context is your words that kind of make sense of all that. So, this clearly shows that Facebook has been very successful. However, there are new kids on the block, people like TikTok, etc. Data too could be the growth in TikTok users. And then next paragraph, a bit more analysis. So that's your narrative again. Fact number 2. And then a quote number 1, Mark Zuckerberg. And then back to narrative with some analysis. And then fact 3, data 3, and then a bit more analysis. But you see how it's constructed. And this is partly what people do when they do PhDs in journalism. You start to divide and break down an article into its constituent parts. And you might think, well, that's a bit boring. But I tell you what, it's incredibly revealing, and it makes you a whole lot better as a writer. So like I said, this is just an example, but that's how you use content. Content is a mixture of research in blue and narrative in pink. Sometimes the article's the other way around. It might be mostly pink and hardly any blue. Opinion pieces, people like Katie Hopkins, they basically just opinion, narrative. Oh, there's a bit of data. Usually wrong in her case, but there you go. So that's content. Any questions about content? Good. And moving on to slide 32, style. Is the essay written in an appealing, appropriate style? Is the prose, in other words, the words, succinct and precise? Succinct, get to the point. Precise, say what you mean. Is the language and the phrasing appropriate for the subject matter? So it's a serious subject matter. Don't try and be funny, folks. Please don't use sarcasm or any of those other things that we do on social media. Slide 33. Essentially, when it comes to style, there are a number of styles. Depending on who you speak to, and depending what their classifications are. But most people would agree that there are different sorts of style. And these are, please note, these are my classifications. So if you speak to somebody else, they might tell you something different. Hang on a second. So most journalism in the UK can be categorised in the bottom 3 or 4 categories. So at the bottom, conversational style. So this is the language that you use with your friends. And even the language you use with your friends is different to the conversational style you'll have with your parents or possibly with your teachers. So the way that you speak on social media to your mates is conversational, okay? It's not the same as the next style up. So tabloid, this is like the Sun newspaper, the chat magazines like OK and Hello. So this is a slightly different style. It's a bit more formal, but it's still quite casual. And then you've got TV news. Think about Fiona Bruce telling us the news on BBC. That's a different style. It's much plainer, that language. They don't use sensational language. They don't use slang words and so on. And then you've got broadsheets, so-called quality newspapers like The Guardian, The Times, The Financial Times. It's very different compared to TV news or tabloid. And then separated from the journalism, you've got this thing that I have to unfortunately do, which is called academic writing, which is quite technical, quite long-winded, you know, quite abstract. And then beyond that, you've got the world of literature. You've got J.K. Rowling or Charles Dickens or Emily Bronte or Ernest Hemingway or George Orwell or whoever it might be. So they exist in a kind of a different sphere. It's still language, and you can still get literary journalism, but generally speaking, it's outside. So the way, slide 34, the way to tell the difference between different styles, look at the vocabulary. So the higher up that tree that you go, on the right-hand side, the wider the vocabulary, typically. So conversationally, you have a certain set of words and slang and colloquialisms and so on that you use with your mates. You wouldn't use that in an essay. Well, I hope you wouldn't. And you wouldn't hear Fiona Bruce talking to the country like you talk to your mates, you know. Further up that tree, the more complex the sentence. So broadsheet newspapers, The Guardian, etc., have complex and longer sentences than in The Sun. And also broadsheet newspapers, they deal in abstract concepts, and tabloids tend to avoid them, you know. So things like human rights, freedom of expression, you know, those are things that you hear about in broadsheets, but not so much in the tabloids. So what I want you to do, what I'm doing here, folks, is just drawing a distinction between different styles. Just be aware there are different styles. It is to some extent a matter of opinion what constitutes one style and what constitutes another, but generally speaking, you can divide journalism into those 4 categories. Slide 35. Now, I always say to my students, aim high. People say follow your dreams. Well, here's my equivalent, aim high. I want you to aim as high as you can. Okay, so, and I would say that the style that you want to aim for is what I would call a combination between academic and broadsheet. You're all intelligent people, you're all adults, you're all qualified to some extent with A-levels and other qualifications. You're all, I think, pretty good at expressing yourself. So I want you to aim high. So think about a sort of combination of academic and broadsheet style. Now, the best way for me to give you an indication of what this represents is to point you at this website that I've mentioned twice already today. It's called The Conversation, and it's academics like me. I've never actually written an article on there. I wish I should do one day. It's academics like me talking about the issues of the world in an engaging and yet quite sophisticated style. You know, so have a read of some of the articles in there. I'm sure you'll understand. You won't have any trouble with them. Some of them, there'll be the occasional word which is a bit challenging. Just look it up in the dictionary. That's how you learn, right? But have a look at The Conversation and see if you can replicate the style that they use. That's what we're aiming for. So we don't want tabloid style. We don't want conversational style. We don't want literary style. We don't want TV news style. What we want is something that approximates to an academic stroke broadsheet style. And the key point on the left, and I've put this in big letters because it happens every year, is do not use first person. So don't say, for example, I think Facebook is on its way out. Right? Just take, the way to deal with it is just take the first few words out. I think that. Just say Facebook is on the way out. You don't need to say I think that. You don't need to use the word I, me or mine at all in your essay. You know, just write it as an authoritative piece of work like a journalist would write. It's very easy to do. It's deceptively easy to do. Just take, because I think at school they're always encouraging you to express yourself, and they encourage you to think of yourself as an individual. But just, which is fine. But you know, we've moved on to a different level now. I'm encouraging you to start thinking like a journalist or a commentator or an academic. Like, I'm aiming high on your behalf, folks. I want you to get away from all that, what I call teenage journalism. This is proper journalism. And you can do it. You can do it. If, as long as you read a lot of articles and you understand how others do it, then you'll be fine. Okay, and then finally, slide number 36. Accuracy. We did it in workshop 1, week 1. You know all about that. I don't need to talk about that anymore. Okay, any questions about assessment 2? That concludes assessment 2. So we're way ahead of the game with assessment 2, but essentially that's your briefing. I'm not going to give you another briefing on assessment 2. You've got hopefully everything you need now. I'm quite happy in the future to discuss ideas with you or something, but I really want to push it over to you and get you on the righteous path. Any questions about assessment 2? Good, I think. No questions. As always, you've either fallen asleep or I've stunned you into silence, or you're very nervous about it now. Hopefully you're in a positive space. Let's talk about assessment 1. Slide 37, moving on to slide 38. So what it says for assessment, thanks Amina, what it says for assessment 1, it's quite a brief briefing. And again, assessment 1, it's up there on Moodle. There is a PDF document. It says students can take inspiration from any of the 8 classes. Credit will be given for choosing a subject, investigating it further, and then presenting new and intriguing information. So this is a PowerPoint, remember, and what you have to do is, as it says, you take an idea, a subject, a concept that we've discussed in one of the first 8 classes, and you take it as a starting point, and like a seed in the ground, you grow it into a tree of knowledge, if you want to take the metaphor a step further. So what you can't do, folks, is just repeat. If you repeat back what you heard in the class, you're going to get a low mark because there's no further investigation. So you need to take something you've learned about and take it further and investigate it. Let's look at the criteria, slide 39. Exactly the same criteria as for the essay, with the added extra of the top one, originality. And as you can see, these criteria spell out the word Oscars, and you will never forget it. Just think golden statues on the red carpet, and you will never forget it. So originality. So we've done all the other criteria. You know what they are. You need to apply what you've just learned about assessment 2 to assessment 1. Structure, content, accuracy, research, and style. And the different one, the one that stands out here is originality. And we did speak about originality in week 1. So originality, slide 40, it describes in red and black and white exactly what you need to do with some highlighted words. So you need to take a novel angle, so do something different. You will get credit for surprising us, me and Adam, when we hear your presentation. Structure, you know all about structure, we'll talk about that again in a moment. Research, again, the highlighted word is active research, above and beyond information given in class. The style, the visuals, your PowerPoint visuals should be appealing, and the words should be appropriate for your audience. So there's a slight change there, but accuracy is exactly the same. So we did this in week, I forget which one, but we did go through this in one of the early weeks. I think it was week 2, I think. We went through assessment 1, so I'm repeating myself here. And if this is new to any of you, please go back to that earlier class and go through it and listen to the audio file. So essentially you've got, I'll go through it briefly, you've got 5 minutes. That's all you've got. You've got 5 minutes. I would suggest you have 5 slides. That's all you need is 5 slides. But they need to be well designed, and you need to put a huge amount of thought into this. Even though it's only 5 minutes, the amount of work involved in this presentation is actually quite considerable. Because again, it's going to be TMI. You're going to have too much information, and your job, your skill, how you're going to earn your marks is condensing all of that information into 5 slides and keeping me and Adam engaged with your brief summary. So slide 1, literally, subject, name, brief outline, 10 seconds. You've got 5 minutes, there's 10 seconds of it. And then you're going to devote, I would suggest, most of your time, 2 minutes to slide 2, 2 minutes to slide 3, 30 seconds to the summary, slide 4, and you just need to include slide 5, the bibliography, but you do not need to talk us through it. So the most of your time should be on slide 2 and slide 3. So what do we know? And I'm using, this is an example here, right? So you need to organize this according to your subject. So generally speaking, slide 2 will tell us, will recap what we already know about, for example, freedom of expression, you know, or fake news or whatever it might be. Talk about definitions, the extent of a problem if there is a problem, and maybe some examples. Slide 3 might be looking to the future or looking for a solution to whatever these problems are. Or you could look here at a case study. So we could look at freedom of expression. You could look at privacy, for example. And even though we've done it in class, so don't do it, but you could look at Meghan Markle's case. So you could talk in slide 2 about what privacy is in general, and a couple of previous examples, and slide 3 could be about the Meghan Markle case. But don't do, like I said, keep coming back to it, don't do what we've done in class. Go and find another privacy case and tell us about it. And then slide 4 is a summary. So this is almost like a news report. You know, when you're watching BBC News and Fiona Bruce says, right, we go over to our correspondent Nick Robinson, who's at the House of Commons. And she goes over to Nick, and Nick, in less than 5 minutes, will tell Fiona and the rest of the country what exactly is going on at the House of Commons. You know, so think about yourself as this. You've got to condense a lot of information into a small number of words. Slide 42. So an example, again, don't use it because we've done it in class. Fake news. Fake news could be your example. Oh, sorry, fake news was the example I was supposed to give you in the previous one. So we could talk about the definitions of fake news, the extent of fake news, examples of fake news, what can be done, how do we stop fake news, and so on the left-hand side. Now, what's really important, whatever your subject, I would suggest very strongly, in fact, I'm going to rephrase that, you must write a 500-word script for your presentation. And the way that we've organised it is that you write your script and then you present your script with your presentation and you get marked on what you present. But you need to submit the script on Turnitin so that the external examiner, another professor from another university, can check our marking, because he or she can't be at the presentations. So you need to submit a 500-word script, devote the majority of your written words to the material covered in slides 2 and 3, obviously, and then read your script at normal speaking speed and time yourself and edit the script to the appropriate length. The reason I say this is that people generally speak about 100 words per minute. When I'm doing my classes, because I've got so much information, I'm probably speaking at 150 words a minute. But you don't want to do that in your presentation. You should aim to do it in a nice, leisurely, calm, measured way. So you need to write your script, go through it, and then reduce it typically, maybe expand it, I don't know, to make sure it fits into 5 minutes. So edit the script to the appropriate length. And key point, as always with PowerPoint, I still do it sometimes, it's a bad habit. Don't overload the PowerPoint with words. You don't need to. If you've got a script, you can just have some very illuminating and attractive visuals. Okay, so that's essentially how to do it. You know all about style, you know all about content. So what I want to do from here on, and I need to get a glass of water because I've got such a dry throat. I've been talking almost for 2 hours non-stop. Happy birthday, Gary. So let me just raise this with you whilst I go and get a glass of water. In fact, let me get a cup of tea. Let's come back in 5 minutes, folks. Let's come back in 5 minutes. But what I want you to do is just think what ideas, concepts and issues have been raised in class so far. So let me just skip on to slide 44. Think about what you've learned. Slide 44. Think about the 6 classes you've had so far, the 6 weeks you've had so far. You don't know about weeks 7 and 8 yet because Adam hasn't done them. But has there been a wow moment? Has there been a moment that you've got, my goodness, I didn't realise that? Or, my goodness, is that true? Or, my goodness, isn't that awful? You know, and think about week 1 and week 2. I haven't listed the other weeks, but that's essentially what we did in weeks 1 and 2. Let's come back in. Let's just do the last 10 minutes for discussion. So 7-minute break for me to get a cup of tea.